Hey there, gang. Patrick King here again, talking about horses with Kendra Skorstad from Skorstad Farrier Service. We got disconnected somehow, so now this is part 2 of episode number 12. And Kendra and I were just talking about the importance of a consistent cycle in your farrier care. So, Kendra, I hate to say it, but let's kind of rehash that whole deal.
Cool, I get to take 2 to make it sound better.
There you go, right? Exactly. The first one was just practice.
Totally. So I think it's important, no matter what the horse's job is, that he gets consistent care. Because when the feet get long, we already talked about how leverage can be destructive, but it is, and it puts the joints out of balance, and it strains the soft tissue, and we get weird deviations in the feet, and it creates strain on the feet, which allows pathogens to get in. And so I think for overall hoof health and health of the whole horse, keeping them on a regular cycle is super important. And that cycle really is different for every animal. But at the same point, I cannot justify in most cases going longer than 8 weeks.
Now, what about the difference in some horses that maybe seem like they can go a little longer? What do you feel about that? And I'm only going to say this because I know I had one horse who seemed to have feet of iron and really didn't have many changes. So he might have only been trimmed a couple times a year.
But at least it was consistent.
Gotcha.
So
Perfect. Okay, good.
But still, that's not typical.
Right.
That's not typical. And I have, in the last 14 years of being a farrier, I have had maybe a few horses that were like that.
Gotcha. And I think the important part probably to note is that while he was only trimmed, I bet this horse was trimmed 3 times a year at best, but his feet were constantly and consistently monitored every day.
I think that's huge. There's definitely people that have animals that they're kind of off-site owners. They have them, but they don't live on the property. They live somewhere else and they have caretakers, but the caretakers might not know enough. And so the horses don't get monitored. And I think that's really key. At least somebody's paying attention, monitoring it. But then they also need to know, when does this need attention? Because sometimes they don't.
Gotcha. Right.
So having a minimum understanding of what is ideal and what we're looking for, what is acceptable and fine to go, and what now needs attention. And and unfortunately, it's not when it finally looks like it needs attention. Because when it finally looks like it needs attention, it's way past due.
It's past due. Exactly. And so then, of course, that's going to be different for every horse depending on their nutrition and their hoof growth.
Yes, absolutely.
Gotcha. So within that, what are your thoughts? This is something that I've always kind of pondered and wondered, and maybe it's me being a little OCD, but those horses that are kind of getting a little long in the foot, but we're still riding them, we're still schooling them, we're still educating them, or even competing on them. My concern is always that as that foot grows and as the length changes, their relationship to the ground is changing, and then their relationship to their body is going to be changing. And my concern, and again, maybe it's me just being obsessive, but I would think that would be changing the way that they're moving and could potentially negatively affect the whole system. What are your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more. I push for shorter cycles with clients all the time for that exact reason, especially for horses that are working. It is so imperative, if we are asking horses, especially performance horses, that we keep them on a consistent schedule to try to keep things as tight and tidy as possible to limit the negative effects of length and the change in their relationship to the ground and their body. It's huge. And I wish more people understood that. And I think we're getting there. So I think it has to do a little bit with how much the horses are working and what kind of work they're doing. Dressage horses especially, because it's so important for these horses if they're showing, and because of the type of job that they have, it's very physically demanding, that we keep things as tight and tidy as possible and as consistent as possible. And it's hard. The foot, I always hear it referred to as a parabolic cone. It grows out and down and forward and all sorts of things. It will almost always distort over time. And so doing everything we can to minimize that distortion, especially if we have a limb that's not straight, is really critical to long-term soundness. I would rather prevent issues than have to go back and try to help these horses along because it didn't get addressed initially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, the reality of it, how many horses have legs that are perfectly straight anyway?
Very, very few.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as they're in their training, in their development, you know, I think you and I have talked about this in the past, how the angle of the leg will change as the horse develops in the thoracic sling, you know, because of how the front legs are not connected bone to bone. They're connected through muscle. So as that muscle develops, the carriage of the leg, the movement of the leg, the positioning of the leg changes.
Absolutely. And even like just young developing horses, their teeth aren't coming into occlusion yet. So they don't have any, they're in their TMJ, they don't have that relationship to balance in their body the same way either. And so it's very difficult for young horses, especially, to have their front feet trimmed because of that thoracic sling and because they don't have their teeth together yet, so that they don't have that as a balance system in place. And so it's fascinating to work with young horses that are growing and maturing from foals on up, because we get to see all these phases of development and how it affects their feet, and it's super fascinating.
Now, I don't know, Kendra. I mean, maybe it sounds to me like you're just trying to make it more difficult than it is. I mean, they make these shoes that are just round. Why can't we just slap them on a foot? And of course, you know I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but it's something that I hear, and I'm sure you hear. And so, what is your take on that? What is your argument back, or your discussion back? Maybe probably best to stay away from an argument there. But how would you face a discussion like that?
Oh, it depends on who I'm talking to, but in general, I can speak for myself, and I can only speak for myself and just the observations that I've had in the industry. There are those of us that will go above and beyond what is ever asked of us. I'll get to your question, but I have to say this part first. What's really fascinating about the farrier community is we all come into this very differently. Vets all go through vet school. Farriers don't all go through farrier school. And we don't all start out coming out of high school. A lot of us, not me, because I did come out of high school and start doing this, but there are guys that have come into this as a second job, a second career in their 40s and 50s, and have decided they want to do something different. And so they all bring something different to the table because of their background. And some of them, it's just a job. And some of them, it's a passion. Some of them, it was a job that kind of turned into a passion. And we all have different levels about the way that we look at feet. And so you're going to have different types of farriers approach things differently. And so it's challenging for me to hear that, especially from the barefoot community, that we just throw on metal shoes and we make the feet fit them. Because we've put so much education and heart into what we do. I can't think of a single person that would ever just slap it on because we all have thought the process through, and all of our education is different. And so maybe we do just slap it on because it might actually fit the foot. That's okay. That's okay. Sometimes I have to reshape a shoe so much it doesn't even look like the original, and that's okay. And I'll be the first to admit, I put hind shoes on front feet all the time. It's okay.
So long as it fits, right?
As long as it fits. And so it fits the foot, it fits the limb, and it fits for what the horse has to do for a job.
Yes.
So there's a lot of criteria that goes into that, and the way that I make those decisions is different from the next guy. And so I can't speak for them, but for me, it makes my blood boil a little bit when those comments are made, because I feel like they're said without an appropriate understanding of the education that the vast majority of us have, and how much we try really hard to do right by these horses.
Right. And that's more of an emotional comment than an educated comment, right? When they're saying things like that, because they're saying it, like you said, without actually knowing what's taking place. So they're basing the comments off of nothing more than assumptions.
Right.
Okay.
Kind of barefoot is best for every single horse, but It's not. I mean, would it be ideal? Is it that thing that we would all love to shoot for? Well, yeah, to some extent.
Right.
But not always.
Right.
I try with my shoeing to keep my horse's feet as free from distortion as possible, as healthy as possible. And I will be the first to tell you, if it's not working, we need to change it. I'm not one to just continue doing something and throwing something at the wall and hoping it's going to stick and keep doing it and doing it and doing it. It's still not sticking. It's not working. You got to change it. And I think that's a tricky thing too, as a farrier. We just, in people in general, we all want black and white. We want cut and dry answers, right? We want they're horses. They're living, breathing, sentient beings, and things change. And they have bad days, just like I have bad days. And so we have to remember that things change. And we cannot always shoe that horse the same today that we will in 4 weeks, because the environment has changed. Maybe his living situation has changed. Something else has changed. So we have to be willing to change our approach, even if it's a couple millimeters. We have to be willing to change and adapt each day. So I've shoed thousands and thousands of horses, but that's not really true. It's just that each horse, each cycle is potentially a little different. And so I have to consider that horse that I have that day.
That's a very important part to think about. I really like that you got there, and I like the way that you talk about, things change from day to day, and that to me is bringing us into that little piece there about the farrier's fault. And my horse isn't moving right today, so it must just be the farrier's fault. Or my horse just can't hold the shoes on, so it must be the farrier's fault. Talk to us about that stuff.
Sometimes it is our fault, for sure. And I'll be the first to own that. And then
I love that, by the way. I love that was the first thing you said.
Well, because it is, like I'm not perfect. I can think of a day where I had a very, very personal situation happen to me. I do my best to keep personal away from work, but it spills over. On occasion, it just does. I did my best that day. The trainer knew I did my best that day, but I was having an off day. And everybody turned out okay, except for one horse. And I apologized profusely to her. And I said, look, you know where I was. I did my best. She's like, no big deal. I went back. I made the situation right. The horse is fine. So it happens. We're human. We have to accept that. We're going to make mistakes. And they're never intentional. I can't speak for anybody else. But I've never gone out and intentionally done something awful to anybody's horse.
Right.
Ever. And so when they say it was the farrier's fault, and he crippled that horse and he butchered his feet, it's like, I guarantee your farrier did not get under your horse and think, I'm going to really massacre these feet today. I just can't imagine a world where that would ever happen.
Right.
I think this job is hard and it's dirty work. And I think that all of us have to enjoy it to some extent or we wouldn't do it. And I can't imagine ever going to a horse and really trying to mess something up for them. I just can't imagine that. And I know I don't do that. So So sometimes it is our fault, but never on purpose. We've never intentionally gone in to create a problem. And sometimes things are out of our control. I've definitely had horses that I've had to shoe and it's been storming and they weren't right afterwards. And I think that cringe response from the lightning and the thunder just created a different situation where they were just oversensitized to things and afterwards weren't quite settled. Not that I did anything different or wrong with the feet, but that, gosh, it was just bad timing. So I think things like that don't get taken into account often enough. The environment changes. Things we don't always consider. I had a lady actually not too long ago. The horse has been barefoot, rock crunchers. She's my exception. We go 14 weeks because the horse has got great rock crunching feet.
Yeah.
Fast forward 10 years, she's in a different barn with a different turnout situation, and the horse has aged and now has some metabolic issues, and now we have some hoof issues. So we've had to take care of that. So it's not my fault. I wasn't over trimming the horse. I wasn't doing anything necessarily different, but she had a lot of things change for her, and that's over a long period of time. But sometimes it's just a short period of time, and we don't realize it. It might just be that it poured for the last 6 weeks and we haven't had any dry weather, or vice versa. It makes a huge difference. Sometimes there's underlying health issues that we don't know about yet, and they start to creep up and we start to see them in conjunction with shoeing. So horses that are maybe starting to get a little bit of arthritis in their knees start to show up a little bit off for a day or so after shoeing. Not that the shoeing was the issue, it's that he had to sit with his knee bent for an extended period of time, and it strained a knee that wasn't feeling great. So sometimes that can be a contributing factor. So I think there are other things that we don't know about sometimes that happen, that just unfortunate coincidence happens to be about the same time I've been there to see the horse.
Yeah, sure. So as a farrier, you strike me as being, and I think I can say this, and I think everybody listening can hear this also, but you strike me as being extremely open to the communication, the critical thinking, the self-awareness, as if you're giving 100% and better 100% of the time, or at least as much as you possibly can. Like we said, nobody's perfect. We all have our days. So how can we help to get from our farrier 100% every time?
It's a super question, and I kind of look at it like this. I picture 100%. And then all these things underneath it make up 100%. So if any one of these things is missing, you're docking down. So you might only get 80% if your horse isn't well behaved that day. Why would you expect me to be able to give you 100% if your horse can't stand still for me? There's no way I can do my job if your horse isn't standing still. Not to the best of my ability, anyway. So I think a well-behaved horse is key. Of course, there's always exceptions.
You're not supposed to be the trainer?
No, I actually walked out on a client today because that was exactly what they wanted, and the horse was completely unhandled, and they just expect me to work a miracle. And I was like, no, I didn't get hired to come here and be a trainer, so it's not my job.
And your price probably doesn't reflect performing miracles.
No, definitely not. So a well-behaved horse is key. A lot of times if horses aren't behaving, actually the vast majority of times horses aren't behaving, pain is involved. Mm-hmm. Very rarely is it a behavioral issue. On occasion it is, and that can be dealt with a number of ways, none of which are my responsibility. And life goes on. So well-behaved horses are really, really helpful to get the best job possible out of me. Having your horse clean and dry and presentable is super helpful. I actually had a client bring me a muddy horse, and she's like, well, I knew you'd clean his feet up, so I didn't even worry about it. And I was like,
oh my.
Super.
Just tack that on the bill.
Right. So clean and dry is helpful. Again, I didn't come here to be your groom. I am happy to pick out the horse's feet. That never bothers me. But when you bring your horse to me and he is mud-caked from his elbows to his feet, and you want me to hold on to your slippery giant, it's always a little tricky. Not to mention the wear and tear on my tools when I have to work on a dirty horse.
Sure.
It definitely chews through my tools faster. So those are my top two. I need a well-lit work area. You ask me to work in a dark stall, and it's going to be difficult for me to assess anything. So I do try to work with my clients to assess horses in a situation where there's better light. But if it's not an ideal workplace, then we move to where it's darker. Flashlights, lights, whatever we need that the horse is comfortable with. You'd be surprised how many horses hate flashlights. But whatever we need to do, I'm always willing to work with people, but having a well-lit area is super important. And also an area that is clean and free of debris. No tack trunks, no dogs, no cats, no children running around where I'm trying to work. I like a level surface to work on, because if I am working on an uneven surface, it is difficult to assess balance and my limb and how I need to trim and address that foot. So I think those are all super duper important. And then my last one that I chuck in there is teamwork. If I have a handler that is on the phone babysitting a toddler, it's not great for me or the horse.
Well, that makes sense. I've seen that so many times.
Yes. So that's why I've added that one in there, because it's so important that we all understand. It's real simple. It's my job to keep everybody safe. I take it very seriously. Nobody needs to get hurt working on a horse, and definitely not me. And so I don't want kids running around. It's not that I don't like kids, and not that they don't know what they're doing. It's just that there's a time and a place. And your horse, as good as Pookie is, and as saint as he is, accidents can and do happen. And I want people to be safe and be mindful of where they're at with their horse, with a farrier underneath them, period.
Right. I'm just going to throw in that I did at one point have a horse named Pookie. So her name, she was a thoroughbred. It was terrible, but her name was Pookie's Princess. I had her in training. She was a fantastic horse. But so every time somebody talks about Pookie, of course, that's where my mind goes. But the teamwork part, that's I see that as being, and again, I'm not a farrier, I'm a trainer, but I go to a lot of barns and I see a lot of farriers working, and I see that as maybe being one of the biggest frustrations.
Yep.
Even down to something as annoying as the horse constantly begging for treats and mouthing for treats and kind of getting teased and then having to get bopped on the nose and corrected the whole time while they're being held. I don't think people think enough about what your back is going through and what your joints are going through underneath a horse that's playing up or moving around because the owner's not aware or causing extra trouble.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's super important, and also knowing when to leave. I have clients that it's them and their horse at home, and nobody ever does anything else with the horses with them. And so the horses have a really hard time focusing with more than one person standing there or working there. And so finally, after getting jerked around for well too long, I finally said, could you just walk away? In like the nicest way possible. Could you just step back? And some owners get really defensive about that, and I understand, but sometimes the horse just needs to focus on one thing. So teamwork isn't always about having multiple people. Sometimes it's knowing when to step away.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that's your list then? You've got those 5 on your list?
That is my list.
I love it. So for anybody who's maybe just tuning in, Kendra's top 5 most important pieces on her list to help get 100% out of your farrier. The horse has to be well-mannered. He needs to be clean. We need to have a well-lit work area. We need a level surface free of debris and chaos. And we need to have teamwork. I love it. That pretty much sums it up right there. I think that's fantastic.
Yep.
So now I'm gonna throw this in at one point here in the broadcast. We'll probably take some questions from some of our audience members here. But one of the questions that I've got for you, because it was posed to me today at a clinic I was teaching, the folks said the horse is fine for them to handle the feet, and they play around and bang on the horse's feet and simulate that they're shoeing and things like that. But the farrier comes around, and the horse just seems like they cannot stand the farrier, either through fear or through disrespect or through whatever they think is going on. The horse seems to have a problem with the farrier as a person, who that farrier is, or something along those lines. And they asked me, what should we do? So of course I said, just fire the farrier and find one that your horse loves. No, I didn't say that. But what I did tell them was to try and find a way to communicate there that maybe the farrier do a little bit of work with the horse, a little groundwork, a little grooming, a little something extra in there to help the horse to become more comfortable. Now, I also understand that, with any professional like this, it's kind of a time is money situation, and there's a schedule to keep and things like that. So is there any advice that you could give on that, where the horse is basically fine for everyone except the farrier?
So an owner's idea of basically fine and mine are basically different.
Yes.
So I want to see. So usually if that happens, I then invite my owner to show me. Show me how good your horse is for you, so I know what I need to work towards.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, genuinely, the horses are great. And sometimes, not so much. So I tend to, I ask my owners to do it so that I can get a handle. It keeps me safe, and I can get an idea of what I'm actually working with. And I have to come to the door and be centered, and I have to be grounded, and I have got to be congruent in what I'm presenting. If I am deep down angry, that horse is not going to let me come anywhere near it.
Right.
And so I do have to take inventory of where I am at that day, and I need to know the horses I can work on wherever I'm at emotionally, and the horses that I can't work on, and the ones I need to reschedule. And it just happens. Again, we're human, so I can't be perfect for you all the time, because I'm going to have bad days, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm having an off day. I'm going to do my best. And if you'd like to reschedule, I think that'd be super. So I do try to check my baggage at the door. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. And I'm honest with my clients when I can't. And so I try to take care of me. I also make sure that, again, pain isn't an issue. Oftentimes I see farriers putting horses in positions they're uncomfortable in, and they end up getting a tug of war with a horse who's just saying, listen, buddy, I hurt in that position. Sometimes it's just a matter of shifting our position a little bit, and it stops all the fight immediately. So from a farrier standpoint, we have to consider those things. And so if it's a training issue, I actually just went through this with a couple of 2-year-olds, with a couple of young ladies. They've got these neat, they got into the quarter horse program where they were given a weanling to work with, and they have to document the whole process and everything. And it's super fun to work with these young ladies. They're highly motivated and doing a great job. But the one little filly is having an issue. And so we discussed the conformation of the horse. I've narrowed it down to what she's okay with and what she's not okay with. And is it a matter of, is it just who she is physically, and she's just not comfortable, and she's young and not quite developed, and it just is going to take some time? Or is it something we need to work on in her training to help her get more comfortable with the idea of having her foot in that position? So we try to go through a checklist to see, is it a training issue? Can we work through this? And is it a pain issue? Do we need a vet involved, or dentist, or chiropractor, or whoever it needs to be? And is it me? Because it can be.
Nice. So there's got to be basically some horsemanship involved in the whole process as well.
Absolutely. I think that some of your best farriers are horsemen, people that have horses themselves, and they get horses. And not that a farrier that doesn't have horses themselves isn't a good farrier, but they lack the level of horsemanship that it takes for us to really excel with some of the challenging ones. And then I had one horse, you'll never forget him. That horse was terrified. Somebody did a number on him, and it was sad. It was so sad. We did everything we could. And I think vets and pharmacology are my best friend at that point. And we do everything we can to make it safe for the horse, safe for the people, and a positive experience. I have no problem with vets and drugs and farrier care if it means that the horse is going to get a better deal. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to stay safe. Mm-hmm. So I have no problem with that. But that horse, man, he would fight back. He wasn't just afraid and try to get away from you. He was afraid and he'd try to hurt you because he didn't know what else to do. His only answer was to fight back. He'd been put in a position too many times that was his go-to, and lost track of him over time. I walked into a barn. I walked past a horse, and he like snorted and shot back in cross ties, and I looked at him, and I'm like, oh, it's you.
Oh, my.
How are you? The owner walked around the corner, and she's like, yep, it's him, same as always. And it was just a bad deal for him, and we did everything we could. I mean, he would be my first horse of the day. I wouldn't wear an apron. I wouldn't wear gloves. I'd hide the tools. He was the first horse that taught me that if he saw a tool, man, he'd come unglued. So you'd have to hide it from him. And if you could hide it from him, you could kind of get his feet down. But heaven forbid he'd see one of your tools and he'd just lash out. And I don't blame him. Something bad happened to that horse somewhere. And that was genuine abuse at some point, But that's one.
Right, and clearly that's a very, very rare case.
Yeah, that's one. And so a lot of times horses that are supposedly acting out or being awful, again, are painful. And we just, they might not be lame and they might be fine, but there is something somewhere that is not okay on a horse. And if you start to dig and you start to ask questions, how is this horse for this? How is this horse for that? Are you having trouble? Then hopefully we can start to piece together the picture and see that, oh, we need to have his stifles looked at. Let's call the vet out. I can't diagnose anything. That's why we need our vets. But it's super important we talk, because I keep finding more and more often it's pain. And the horses are really good at hiding it, and they're not lame, they're not head bobbing, they're not limping, but they're off. Mm-hmm. And they're not comfortable.
Very true. It makes so much sense. And they're not going to be able to stand up on 3 legs well if they struggle to stand up on 4.
Right. And I have some horses that we can get through the whole shoeing process. I can shoe their front end. I can trim, fit, do everything I need to for the hind end. And as soon as I start to nail, done. They're done. Something about the driving the nails they don't like. I've tried changing hammers. I've tried changing nail sizes. I've tried changing shoes to see if the vibration would change. I've tried. But, that's where we got some drugs on board, helped these horses have a good deal, help them feel like they don't have to fight, and help them feel more comfortable. So we would get some other medications on board to help with the pain. And the horses are doing okay. And now we don't need drugs because we showed them that it doesn't have to hurt and that memory doesn't need to be there. And we can kind of reprogram that for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, rebalancing their body, you're giving their body an opportunity for the pain to be alleviated and the discomfort to go away.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so you talked about changing your tools and that sort of thing. So maybe we can get into some practical tips for horse owners. What would you say are the tools that a horse owner should have? Kind of the general farrier tools every horse owner needs?
Everybody needs a hoof pick. They don't know it, but they do, and they need to know how to use it. They need a pair of shoe pull-offs, a wire brush, and I do like my owners to have a rider's rasp. I do the handy little tool. You have to really get aggressive with it to do any major issues, but I think for a discerning person, and I think it's a great tool. You'd be surprised how many people I will get that don't own hoof picks. It's
really?
Important.
A hoof pick?
Yes, they don't. They just don't have it. I've had a couple people, super newbies to horse owning, and just didn't know, and we talked about it. Now they have them. It's great. So the hoof pick isn't just to clean out debris. It's also to be able to look at your foot. So you need to be able to clean it out. Make sure there's no foreign objects. Make sure everything looks okay so that you can bring it to your farrier's attention so you can ask questions. If you don't know what's going on down there, you should. I think pull-offs, shoe pull-offs or crease nail pullers. I like the pull-offs better because you can almost always get a shoe off with a pull-off, even if you wreck the foot. You can't always do it with crease nail pullers because you can't always grab the nail. And if you're a horse owner, it's not always easy if the nail head's worn down. So shoe pull-offs, I think, are super duper important. Nobody wants to get stuck with a shoe that's half on and twisted and the horse is standing on a clip or the shoe or the nail. It's never a good deal, and I can never get there fast enough to make it better. So I think that is a super important tool to have. And any of my clients, I am happy to go over proper tool use. I've made a little video at one point. I don't know where it is, but I could find it and dig it up. But I made a little video on how to take a shoe off. I think it's an important skill to learn. It's not going to be easy because I do this every day and they don't. But
right.
If it's the difference between serious injury for your horse and a little bit of tough work, I'd take tough work over serious injury. So
This is true. So you mentioned the wire brush. What would the wire brush be for?
Just to clean it out and really look. Sometimes there are things hiding that we can't see. I am such a stickler about cleaning out feet, especially because I don't want to drag any of my tools through rocks or nails. But we've definitely had foreign objects get stuck in feet and they look flush to the hoof wall, and sometimes you miss it with a hoof pick. And so a wire brush just takes your ability to the next level. And it doesn't have to be something you do every time, but it is really helpful to be able to clean out all the cracks and crevices, especially if you have to treat for thrush or an abscess or white line or something. A wire brush does a way better job than a hoof pick will at cleaning out some of those cracks and crevices.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. And we definitely want to talk about treating thrush and abscesses and things here in a moment. You also mentioned a rider's rasp as part of the toolbox. What is that, and how do we use that?
So it's this fancy little tool that has basically a really fine tooth on it, and it's V-shaped. It's kind of got like a brush handle almost, and then there's a 90-degree notch in it. It has two little rasps side to side in there, and what it allows you to do is go around the edge of the hoof wall and round up any edges. So a rider's rasp is not going to be for somebody who has shoes on their horse. It's going to be for our barefoot owners. I think that it's helpful. So if you need to go a little bit longer in your cycle and you still need to fit into hoof boots, but you have a horse who gets a little distorted, you can help manage that distortion a little bit. And this is something that your farrier should absolutely go over with you about where and how to use, because again, you could do it a little bit too much, and I've had it happen. I had a client use it a little bit too much in one spot and created a little bit of imbalance. We went over proper use and where I want her to use it, where I don't want her to use it, and it solved the problem. So definitely something to consider talking to your farrier about using correctly. But again, you have to get pretty aggressive with it to cause any major issues. But to be able to round off some sharp edges for your safety with picking them up, maybe if you have a horse who interferes a little bit, keep them from, cutting themselves is, helpful. And again, for keeping boots fitting appropriately, I think it's a great tool to have.
I like it. So are those the 4 tools then that you would recommend?
Yes.
Okay. So a hoof pick, which, wow, I'm sorry, I'm amazed by that one. I would think that would be first on the
Right?
shopping list, but
I'm happy to make somebody a hoof pick if they don't have one too.
yeah, sure, right? So a hoof pick, a shoe pull off, a rider's rasp, and a wire brush.
Yep.
That seems like a pretty basic kit. I like it. I like it. So,
If we want a more advanced kit,
oh,
they
yes,
need
yes. Let's get
they-
advanced.
they need a little bit of a first aid kit. So if you have to treat a little puncture wound, which, by the way, if you have any foreign object stuck in a foot, you need to call your vet immediately, not your farrier, but your vet.
Mm-hmm.
You need that's how far in it's gone and what structures it's affected. I think it's super important to involve a vet for any foreign object. So aside from that, treating any sort of hoof issue, I think having vet wrap, duct tape, poultice pads, gauze, some sort of triple antibiotic ointment are super great things to have. If you don't want to do duct tape and all that, baby diapers are super.
For sure. And really, I mean, that first aid kit, that sounds like something that they should have anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know we keep a bucket. It's a 5-gallon bucket with just about everything in it that we could probably imagine for a first aid kit. And yeah, it has come in handy with things like treating abscesses and any kind of mild punctures that we might run into. So then let's get on and talk about that. Let's talk about thrush and talk about abscesses. And I'll let you decide which one you want to tackle first.
Talk about thrush. I feel like it gets missed a lot by everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but we all missed it. So I think that the most important thing for helping horses combat thrush is they have to have proper nutrition. It just has to be there. And that can be a variety of things. But for me, the way I define that is food that isn't high in sugars and fillers, and food that is nourishing, species appropriate, and based on forage, and having a good vitamin mineral supplement and a fatty acid of some sort. So I keep it basic and I keep it as healthy and clean as possible personally. And that's typically what I recommend. Everybody's a little bit different, but the higher the sugar, molasses, corn, things like that, that you have in your food, the more inflammation you're going to have in the body and the less likely you're going to be able to fight infection. So that's one of the best things you can do to combat thrush is to feed your horse well.
Makes perfect sense. What about the conditions your horse is in?
Yes, that's point number 2. So the environment is super important. Having an environment that's as dry as we can get it, something that is as clean as possible. We pick up our pens all the time. I recommend my clients pick up their pens. They don't need to be standing in the manure. It's not healthy for them. So clean and dry as much as possible and consistent. The wet, dry is really challenging on the feet. They cannot cope and adapt fast enough to wet, dry. So we end up getting pathogens when we have those extremes. So trying to keep it as consistent as possible is really important. And so I look at those 2 things, and then depending on the severity of the thrush will depend on the treatment that we need to use and how often our owners can realistically, not idealistically, but realistically apply. I have owners that are like, well, we only get out here, twice a week, but we'll get it done every day. Well,
right.
I know it's not going to get done every day. So then we need to use a product that is going to be a little bit more hard hitting to get ahead of the thrush, because it's detrimental and it can have very serious impacts on your horse's health, soundness, performance. We need to take care of it. It's not a joke. So for me, I have heavy hitters for the people that can't treat them. as often, like every single day, and there's nothing wrong with that. We just have to be realistic about what you can actually do.
Sure.
And then if you are one of those people that can do it every single day, we might use something that's a little bit easier on the system, but needs to be applied every single day. So some of my go-to products for treating thrush is Artemud. I love Artemud. It's a Red Horse product. It packs in there. It's a clay. It's drying. And so it stays in there very well. So you might not have to treat it for a couple of days. So even though it's not a heavy hitter, for me, it is because it stays in the foot. And so I like that.
Gotcha.
So if I have a client that can get there every other day, I think Artemud's a great choice. Something else that the people use a lot and that I recommend is for cow mastitis. There's a couple of different kinds. One's called Today and one's called Tomorrow, and it has to do with whether or not the cows are dry or milking.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So either product tends to work quite well at treating thrush. What I like about it is that it comes in a syringe with a flexible, long, like inch-long tip. And so if we have thrush that goes into the central sulcus, up into the frog, and up into the hairline,
you can get in there with it.
You can, and you can just fill that crack up, which I think is super. So treating thrush is important that you get to the root of it. So just spraying something on top sometimes isn't enough, especially if you have a deep thrush like that. And those kinds of things can really cause horses to be quite painful. So it's really important we get the thrush medication down to the bottom and help it heal from the inside out.
Perfect. Makes perfect sense.
And because of that, I stay away from caustic materials. I don't like things like bleach used on feet.
Okay, and that's something that we see relatively commonly.
Yep. And so I just feel like if you wouldn't scrub your hands with bleach, why would you do it with your horse's feet? Are there guys that recommend it? Absolutely. Can you do it safely? To some extent, yes. But for me, for my average owners, I just don't think it's something we need to be applying, especially if there's a possibility that we have sensitive tissue that's been affected. I don't want anything caustic to aggravate or irritate that foot, because one, I don't want to impede healing, and two, because if you traumatize that foot and make it painful, guess I'm not going to let you treat his thrush tomorrow.
Yep, exactly. And then you've got a whole new ball of wax to deal with.
Right. So that's really important to me. So other things that I like to use, Clean Tracks is a great treatment. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's a one-time treatment and it's very effective, and it permeates into the hoof deeper than almost anything else and is very safe for the environment and for the horse as well. And so I really like Clean Tracks.
Clean Tracks, okay.
Yep. Something super simple and old-time, Sugardyne. You mix betadine with sugar, make a nice paste, smear it in there really good, and I think that that's a great treatment. The sugar and the iodine have this great relationship where they help treat it and they help kind of toughen everything up at the same time. So I think it's actually, even though it's been around forever, I think it works really well. It's super cheap. It's easy to make. Anybody can get their hands on it. You can go to the grocery store and get what you need. You don't have to go to a specialty store to get thrush treatment. Right. So I think that works really well. Sometimes it's simple as we just have a really simple, mild thrush, and we just apple cider vinegar works really, really good. And I'll have people just throw that in a spray bottle, and that works great.
Interesting. You're talking on just a mild thrush.
Yeah, something mild. I have this theory that thrush isn't always a bad thing, until it is. But the frog sloughs off a couple times a year, and most times the farriers are cleaning up the frog for you, so you never see it. But I do feel like part of the sloughing off happens in help by thrush, those organisms. It's just when they get out of control, whether it's due to environment or the frog not being able to slough off, that it becomes a bigger issue. And so I kind of have that theory in the back of my head that, it's not a bad thing, but I feel like
that's very interesting.
For really, really mild cases, or just for just hoof hygiene, a spritz of apple cider vinegar is great.
So you mentioned the sugar and iodine, and that's something that I grew up with as a treatment for abscesses also. Let's talk about treating abscesses.
So I think it's important to note, because some people don't know this, is that an abscess is a pocket of infection.
Yes.
So what we need to do is help draw it out. So whatever we do, we need to have a drawing action. So there's ichthymol, there's different types of drawing clays, there's these super handy enamel Lintex pads that you can use wet or dry, Epsom salt poultices or Epsom salt soaks. These are all super good things to help draw. And so I think that's first and foremost. Digging out abscesses, nobody wants to see their horse hurt, for sure. And it's hard to watch a horse in pain when they have a raging abscess, because it'll look like they broke their leg. They're so painful. They're so painful. So we always want to try to relieve that pain. But unfortunately, when we go digging for them, sometimes if we're not 100% sure where that abscess is, we can do more harm than good, and now we have a greater problem that we have to deal with, and the abscess still is a problem. So I feel like digging is only an option when we have the utmost certainty of where it is, and that can only be done, not only, but it's aided by radiographs, different views than what we traditionally do, and hoof testers sometimes are really, really helpful. And I don't have a problem trimming a horse with an abscess, other than they don't want to stand on the affected foot. But sometimes just in routine trimming, we find the abscess tract. So, and we can open it up for them and provide some relief. So otherwise, I like for them to work it out on their own. If it's taking longer than 7 to 10 days to resolve, definitely call your vet, get your farrier involved. There could be something else going on that's creating abscesses that we need to look into, or it could just be a really bad abscess, but it's worth looking into. So for me, I try not to dig. I try not to cause more damage, because that abscess is going to open, and typically it's going to be damaging in and of itself. Movement is super helpful to help push out the abscess, but please do not force your horse to work. Just turn them out like normal. And if they're going to be in a turnout with other horses that are going to push him, don't do it. There's just no risk for him trying to hobble around on 3 legs and injure something else. And it's just cruel. Just no forced movement, but movement on his own is fine.
Okay, fantastic. Now, what about prevention? Is there something we can do in the eyes of prevention of an abscess?
Abscesses happen for a lot of reasons, and so we can't possibly cover all the prevention to make sure that all of those things happen, so we never have an abscess. Because I've had horses with shoes and pads on, abscess. So those always make me kind of scratch my brain and go, well, how the heck did he abscess? He had a shoe and a pad on. And so for me, those are horses that are detoxing or had something internal happen, and it just came out through the feet. And there's no explanation, and you'll never know why. So prevention otherwise, we talk about, vets, farriers talk about ideal sole thicknesses, and it's different depending on different parts of your country, and some are realistic and some aren't, and that's okay. But what we need to determine is what's ideal for that horse, and it's different from horse to horse to horse. And so helping a horse maintain his ideal sole thickness, whether it's through shoes or barefoot or a combination of, is important. So if you have a super thin-soled horse, they are potentially going to be more inclined to bruise, and bruises can then turn into abscesses. So protecting the feet, not forcing horses to walk on rocks until their feet toughen up, because I don't see that work. It's just not something that makes any sense to me. It's just, it hurts. It's going to continue to hurt. And then because they're compromised in how they're moving, it's going to have other greater effects on the body. So for me, that's not something that I tend to recommend. So I think hoof protection is probably one of our best things we can do for horses that are prone to thinner soles or bruising or, yeah, I think that would be it.
So it comes down just as much to knowing about the hooves that you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even breed specific, because I have thoroughbreds with rock crunchers that are barefoot, and I have quarter horses that are tender-footed as all get out.
Yeah.
So it really is individualized, and coming up with a care plan with your team for what he needs for his feet to be healthy is super important. And what's also really interesting to note, I had a horse that chronically abscessed out. It's my horse. Of course it's my horse. She chronically abscessed out the bars and the frog and the heels on her hind feet. Couldn't figure it out. Like 3 times a year, monster abscesses that would take a week to 10 days to blow out, and it would blow out a third of her foot every time. I mean, they were big abscesses, and it really started to impact her ability to do anything useful. She was basically a pasture pet, because then it would take us so much time to recover her hoof because she'd lost so much of it. And it would be so unstable from having the abscess. And this was during the time that I was like, we got to keep her barefoot. We got to keep her barefoot. Well, what I realized was that my horse wasn't using her body well. So she had a compromised posture, which was putting undue stress on her heels, and her feet literally couldn't take it. And so we started shoeing her along with, and this was years ago, along with a change in dentistry, along with chiropractic care, along with the best that I knew how to do at that time. She stopped abscessing.
Interesting. When you treat the whole horse instead of just the hoof.
Yep, absolutely. So for her, and I think, I do try to talk to clients that have horses that are chronic abscessors to look at the bigger picture, because it's not just a foot issue. It's not just the farrier's fault. It is sometimes something else that the horse is doing. And she never, to me at that time, I know more now, but at that time, I didn't think my horse was lame or had a problem or wasn't using her body well. I just didn't know. And then I learned more, and then I did more, and then I resolved my problems.
Boy, the awareness of the lameness, the proper mechanics, the proper use of the body, that is something that I see people constantly developing with, and sometimes being a real challenge, is that they don't recognize that the horse is maybe not sound, because they don't recognize proper versus improper movement and use of the body.
Right.
All right. So, topicals for the hoof. That's something we see aisles at the tack shop devoted to creams and pastes and powders and liquids and pour-ons and all that fun stuff for the hoof. And I'm not just talking about the sparkly stuff. I'm talking about the oils and the treatments and things like that. What is your take on that? Are there some we should stay away from? Are there some that you find to be most beneficial? What are your thoughts?
Like everything else, it depends. So depends on your environment. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on whether or not you bathe your horse every single day or once a year. So for me, the foot is designed to regulate its own moisture quite efficiently and quite well. The periopal is a little coating that starts up at the coronary band and grows down, half inch on some horses, depending on the horse, depending on the breed, depending on the environment. And it does help with moisture regulation. So I think the foot does it well on its own. Very rarely do I ever recommend a topical to change the moisture content of the foot. The foot knows better than I do for what it needs, for the amount of moisture that it needs. I've had some fun using moisture meters that you can get at the hardware store and putting it on the hoof wall, the outer hoof wall, the inner hoof wall, the white line, the sole, the frog, the heels, the everything, to play with how much moisture is there. When it's super dry, when it's super wet, it's something in between, and it's just super interesting. And so I find that very rarely do we need something. The times that we do is when we're dealing with wet, dry, wet, dry. The feet cannot adapt fast enough when it's going from wet to dry, especially during the season changes. It's very difficult for them to keep up. There's really only so much we can adapt to. So for things like that, I like the product Hoof Armor, which I've only recently started using, but I've been very happy with. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
I remember chatting about that.
Yep. And so I've been very happy with that. There's another product on the market called Duracornum, and that also helps break the wet-dry cycle as well. So I like those two products. So they would be the ones at this point until I learn more or new products come out that I would recommend for things like that.
Hoof Armor, and what was the other product called?
Duracornum.
Duracornum. Okay. Hoof Armor and Duracornum.
Yep. And that's something that people can apply as long as you can get your feet super clean. People, as in horse owners, can apply if you can get your feet super clean and dry and free of debris. Otherwise, your farrier can absolutely apply them for you. I think both products, I know Hoof Armor does, but I think both products can have ingredients added to help combat fungus and bacteria growth, so there's no need to worry about sealing in something accidentally. I'm kind of a stickler for cleanliness when it comes to feet, so I do what I can to clean my feet appropriately with topical antimicrobial or a hoof torch. I use a little butane torch a lot to try to dry out and clean my feet and kill any bacteria or fungus that might be there. So that's really helpful for me. So I'm kind of a stickler at trying to keep things clean if I'm going to be applying something to the foot. But I like those two products. There's a couple other products out there that act as a type of sealant. If I know a horse is going to be getting a lot of baths, I like using the, of course I would draw a blank on it.
No pressure, but everyone's waiting.
I can see the bottle in my work trailer, but I can't think of the name. I'll come up with it later. But it's a sealant that we use. Oh, Kevlar.
Kevlar, okay. Mm-hmm.
Kevlar. I don't mind that. That's not so bad. And so if we're going to apply that, do it before you give a bath. Something to help shed the water off. I typically find we don't need to be adding moisture. We need to be taking it away. So I'm not a big fan of hydrating lotions and potions and oils. Oh my, it just doesn't seem to be what we need.
But again, that would depend on the ecosystem, right?
It would be. And I work on horses in the desert. I fly out to Arizona and I don't ever have her put anything on the feet. Yeah, they're rock hard, but they're in a rock hard environment, and so they should be. So I would.
So even then, you don't find a need for that.
Nope, I don't. Are there certainly horses that are different and are having trouble? Sure, but I don't typically find that it's a hoof topical that solves the problem. It's a nutrition, it's a body thing, it is a farrier thing, and it's not a topical that's going to be solving that problem. Can they maybe aid? Sure, but I'd rather get down to the basics first before I go spend people's money on a topical that I don't feel there's enough science there to absolutely say for certain it is something that's going to help.
Interesting. Well, that should help save some money too, and I know everybody's happy to do that. So
absolutely. I had one who she brought out her whole product kit. She had 10 different hoof applications, and she used them all for various times and various days and various hours, and I loved her thoroughness for wanting to ensure that her horse's feet were happy and healthy, but we just found that it wasn't totally necessary, that the horse is actually okay without it.
Interesting. So I would imagine with things like that, there's a potential to go overboard, right?
I believe so. Yes, I had one lady we had a drought a few summers back, and her particular horse had gotten super dry, cracked feet, and I said, you know what? Why don't you just expose him to a little bit of moisture every single day? Not a big deal. Actually, I didn't even say that. That's what ended up happening. I think I said twice a week. Like, make sure your horse gets a bath, a good soaking bath, like twice a week. And she did it every single day. And she got his feet so wet that with the dry, hard ground and stomping flies, he destroyed his feet. Yep. So definitely there is a point where excess is damaging and problematic.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about changes like with the wet dry cycles? And I mean, I'm thinking in particular here now, a lot of the friends that we all have that have gone through these hurricanes and the floods and things like that. Are there things that they can be doing to help their horses' feet?
Get them to dry ground as much as you possibly can. Sometimes there is no way to avoid the moisture because of humidity, and that's something that's overlooked quite a bit. Humidity is also considered moisture, so it's not just standing water from rain in their paddocks. It's also humidity. Okay. So trying to keep them dry as much as you can, whether the paddocks are dry or getting them into some shavings, into a stall, and letting the shavings kind of draw on the feet will help. But I don't know that I like the idea of having them stand in dry shavings overnight to go back into the mud the next day. I don't know that it's the answer, but I don't know that it's detrimental, but it just makes me be curious, because I think that the foot has only so much elasticity to change in a 12-hour period, that it just makes me curious if that's the way we should be going. And I don't have a better answer, but I will still always take dry over not dry.
Gotcha. Okay. So we have owners that on occasion need to take their horse's pulse through the hoof. So we'll talk about the digital pulse. And I know you mentioned talking about the moisture content in the hoof. Maybe we can talk about checking surface temperature of the hoof. That's something that we see a lot. People say, oh, this foot feels a little warmer than the other foot, or this spot feels a little warmer than the other spot. So talk to us about the digital pulse and then checking surface temperatures.
The one thing I think that's really fascinating about horses is they have these little valves in their blood vessels in their lower legs where they can shunt the blood back towards the body and keep it away from their feet. And so that has to do with temperature regulation for them during the heat and cold and just day-to-day work. And so it's really cool because there will be points during the day that the feet will feel really hot, and then times where it'll feel cold, and that's just the body's normal heating and cooling mechanism working. So sometimes it's just normal, but getting to know a little bit what's average and normal for your horse is really helpful for you to determine when we have temperature that's persisting that is above normal. I don't typically get concerned if it's colder, but if we have a foot that's staying hotter longer than what he normally does, I tend to start asking questions. So different areas of the foot might feel warmer because it might be indicating that we have a problem in that area. So you want even consistency in temperature around the whole foot. Sometimes the heel bulbs are a little bit warmer, and that's normal. It's going to be warmer towards the coronary band, cooler towards the distal, the portion of the foot furthest away from the body. So it's going to be cooler there, and that's totally normal. So consistency is key. Hot spots are definitely something that I'd be a little bit more concerned about. Digital pulses, checking a digital pulse is super helpful because, again, it gives us an idea of where your horse is and what his normal is. Horses that have been exercising, because the blood is pumping, they're going to have a little bit of an increased pulse. So That's normal, and how much of an increased pulse is different for each horse. Some horses tend to carry a little bit stronger pulse than others, and so getting familiar with what is normal for your horse is helpful for later, using that as a piece of information to determine whether or not we have an issue. So typically, if you can't feel your pulse, as long as you're in the right place, that's pretty ideal. It should be very faint. You should barely be able to feel it, and so I'm happy with that. If you are resting your fingers in the correct place, and there's a couple different places to check the pulse on the distal limb, if it is throbbing and bounding and pushing your finger away, you have some sort of inflammatory response going on in that area.
Gotcha. So you said ideal then, we should barely be able to feel it.
Correct.
Okay.
And
awesome.
It's difficult to explain without a photo. I think I had sent you one to maybe share with people where the nerve, artery, and vein bundle run. But it runs down the back of the leg, towards the back part, but not the very back, just around the sides of the fetlock, and then towards the back, but not totally behind, but it can vary a little bit horse to horse on the pastern and into the foot. And so typically you can feel the pulse just at or above the fetlock, and then just below on the pastern. It's typically where people check for pulses. And pulses sometimes can be stronger on the inside of a foot or the outside of a foot, in one foot over another foot. So again, getting to know your horse is helpful, and then you can start to identify if you have a lameness and you check the pulses. It can help you hopefully narrow down a little bit what might be going on.
Gotcha. So the key, again, is understanding the horse you're working with, understanding what his normal is.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, great. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to figure out how to upload those videos in the comments section, or those photos in the comments section of this audio, but I'm going to make sure that we share those after the broadcast as individual posts so that folks can see those.
And I want to make a plug. Those pictures that I sent to you are from Paige Poss. She and her associate have developed Anatomy of the Equine. It is a huge learning tool. She's got beautiful images. She does gorgeous dissections and really breaks the anatomy down so people can really see how it goes together. And it's fascinating work that she's doing, and it's beautiful. I mean, if you like looking at dissections, but she does a beautiful job illustrating the anatomy.
Awesome.
Yeah, Jenny Edwards is her partner.
Great. Yeah, after the broadcast, I'll be sure that we get those posted up there. So fantastic. Let's see. Do you mind if we dip into a couple of our questions that have come in?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So, let's see. Where do we go here? So, Suzanne has typed in a question, and it's unfortunately in the feed here for me, it's half disappeared. But I remember chatting with her about this challenge, so I think I'm going to try to fill in for what I can't read at this point. So, her horse had some pour-in pads in the front shoes, and over the frog, the epoxy, the pour-in, the silicone, the whatever the product was that was put in there seemed to swell after it was applied. This actually led to a coffin bone fracture, or it seemed to lead to that. Because basically the foot then was not stable, so it was kind of like a little weeble wobble sort of deal, forcing the foot to load out to the side rather than square, rather than flush with the ground. Is this something that you see very often, or was this just potentially maybe a bad moment, a faulty product at that point?
So It's difficult to answer that question without seeing the problem that you had. The way that I picture a pour-in pad is that there's a shoe that has some sort of mesh applied, and then they typically use VetTech EquiPack or Soft Pack to fill in the void from the hoof surface to the ground surface of the shoe, sometimes a little bit depressed. So that product doesn't typically swell. There are products that do, but that is not a product that swells or expands. So it makes me curious how it was applied, and without seeing it, I can't comment on it. Gotcha. So I think it's interesting in that I haven't heard of a horse that had been more centrally loaded, so meaning the middle of his foot was taking load, have a coffin bone fracture due to that specifically. So he would have to have, I would think, a pretty significant load in the middle of his foot, and then the walls being unloaded to make him weeble wobbly, like you're explaining, to fracture his coffin bone. But I still can't quite see that, because we use that kind of idea for loading the central part of the foot for treating various pathologies in the foot. And we don't typically see a coffin bone fracture happen as a result of that. So it makes me curious what else was going on, or what potentially happened beyond just that causing a coffin bone fracture.
Interesting. Okay.
I'd have to know more to be able to talk about it, but without more details, it's really difficult to say. But seems unlikely, unless it was something very extreme, that in and of itself caused a coffin bone fracture.
Gotcha. So then this almost sounds then like it goes down to what we touched on earlier, where just a terrible sense of cosmic timing.
Quite possibly.
Okay. Let's see. So we have another question here from Beth. Beth asks, how can we tell if the nutrition or a lack thereof is creating a negative impact on our horse's hooves?
Usually we'll see, sometimes it gets called grass cracks, but we'll get vertical cracks running around the hoof on all 4 feet. So if we have one foot affected, not typically a nutritional issue. All 4 feet can be a nutritional issue. So we can get these vertical, very, very shallow cracks that run all the way around the circumference of a hoof. Or you can have deeper cracks. We'll also get horizontal rings that are growing out as the hoof grows, and the rings happen because the lamellar connections aren't as strong, and then they get stronger as things are changing nutritionally or systemically as far as inflammation is concerned, which can be a result of the food that they're eating. So we can see things like that happen. So it's hard to sit down and say, oh, he's not getting enough protein, or he's not getting enough copper or zinc or some of those very important trace minerals in their diet. But if we have horses that are having chronic infections, white line disease, thrush, maybe abscessing, I don't know that we've had a correlation with poor nutrition and abscessing, other than the quality of the hoof goes down and then it's not as robust.
Gotcha. It leaves it more prone to the abscesses.
Yep, absolutely. So I would be looking at those things. I would be looking at things that are happening in all 4 feet, not just a pair of feet or a single foot.
Gotcha. Okay. A question from Deborah. How do you decide what kind of shoe is best for a particular horse? I feel like this could probably be a broadcast in itself.
Totally. So it has to do with the horse, the job, the conformation, a little bit of its personal preference. I I have a couple a couple styles of shoes that I like. I've become extremely proficient with using them and shaping them and getting what I need out of those shoes for the vast majority of my horses. Are there horses that will fall outside of that need a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that? And we need something different than what I can achieve in the shoes that I typically use. Then we look to what other options are on the market, or is it something that I actually have to build from scratch? That's a possibility too. And so it's different for every horse. You know, we want more traction on our horses that are doing speed events, barrel horses or pole benders, things like that. We need less traction on horses that are reiners. We don't typically want traction on horses that are dressage horses. We need them to get up and out of the sand or surface, whatever they're working on, because it isn't always just straight sand anymore. So I look at what they have to work on. That's huge. The surfaces that we have now for horses to work on is so different than what they had 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so that definitely influenced the type of shoes that we can use to help horses do their jobs without actually creating more trouble for them. So those are the things that I look at without getting into specifics, which is really difficult because a lot of it too is, like I said, is just a little bit personal preference and how we were taught and the things we've become comfortable with using.
Mm-hmm. Which makes perfect sense. You know, you use the tools that you feel best suited to use.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So one more then from the listeners here. Peyton asks, how do you tell or how do you decide if an older horse may need shoes?
It's a great question for Peyton because I get this a lot. When they aren't able to maintain their comfort level, doing what you're asking them to do is when it's time. So whether or not it's comfort in their joint health or comfort in their hoof health, then that's the time that we need to consider that shoes are the next best option. Making sure that we've covered all our bases, that there's not an underlying health issue, such as a metabolic issue, causing the body to change in response. If we can help those things, then we might not need shoes, or we might need them temporarily until we take care of the other health issues involved.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay. So we've been going now for about 2 hours. These broadcasts have seemed to go on for that long, which is fantastic. I love it. And I have a feeling that you and I could probably go on for another 2 hours and not cover everything that's on either of our lists.
Sure.
So
I know you can get everything.
Right, exactly. So was there anything really in particular that you want to touch on before we get into our wrap-up?
No, just communicate. Build a team with people you trust. Be willing to adapt and change, not take things personally, and be willing to look at the bigger picture. I think are like the big key points about everything that I would want to touch on.
Perfect. I think that might actually be your answer to the first wrap-up question that I have, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So,
okay.
If there was one specific thing that you could recommend for riders to focus on as a means of improving the health of their horses' hooves, what would that be?
Communication. Because it has to start there. If I don't know what's happening under saddle, I can't do my job any better. And if I can't do my job, I can't make what's happening better under saddle, and we don't know to make any changes. I have horses that, quick story, I had a horse, I was trimming for years, and I'd always ask, how are the horses doing? How are the horses doing? Oh, they're great. One day, I changed my question. I said, so how'd the horses do after the last trim? Oh, well, like usual, he was sore.
Aha! Different question, totally different response, yeah.
So what do you mean he was sore? Oh, yeah, he's always sore for like a week after you do him.
Oh,
Oh,
really?
this is horrifying. This is not something I would ever want to have happen.
Right.
So it's not something that should ever have happen. Your horses shouldn't be sore. There are occasions, but I will always warn clients when and why that might happen. But for the most part, they shouldn't be sore. So communication is key, and we need to be able to do it objectively without personal emotion involved, because it's not personal. We're just trying to evaluate the information we have and come up with the best possible decisions to make whatever it is better.
Makes perfect sense to me. Okay, so the next two here are horsemanship questions, because that's what this is all about also. If you could ride with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
Ride with a trainer, yes?
Sure, well, anybody.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I'd love to ride with you more. Is that terrible? Is it okay to say that?
It's not going to get you any brownie points if that's what you're shooting for.
Darn it. And I mean that because I find you a little like me. You're very open-minded. You separate the wheat from the chaff, and I super appreciate that. I always appreciate working with people, and I don't know them till I find them sometimes, but I always appreciate people that are willing to say, I don't know everything, and they also keep learning. Those are the people I want to work with and I want to keep riding with. And I don't know who they all are yet, but I know they're all out there.
I love that. You don't know who they are until you find them.
Yep.
I love that. I love that. So what is your personal definition of horsemanship?
Oh boy. Being able to meet the horse where he is that moment.
I love it.
Meeting him where it is and supporting him through whatever it is, whether it's a riding issue or a groundwork issue or a trimming issue. Where is he that day, and what do we need to do to meet him there so he can have a good deal, so he can feel good about himself and he can feel confident and be willing to want to participate again.
Oh, I think that's a big piece. He's got to be able to feel good about himself. I love that. I love that. So how can folks find you?
Through my Facebook page. I don't have a website, not anymore, but through my Facebook page, my business page, or my personal page. You can also contact Sean. I feel terrible. My husband, I have to say this, my husband is my partner in my business, and it's new, but I didn't say him at the beginning, but we've been working together for a couple of years now, and he's an integral part of my business. So you can connect with him on Facebook as well and connect with the both of us.
Perfect. And shout out to Sean. We love you, Sean.
I will let him know. He's been respectfully quiet all evening.
Has he been? Oh, my goodness. That's awesome. So, okay, so I know you've seen a handful of my videos and maybe listened to a handful of these audios. So you know that at the end there's always a question of the day, and anytime there's a guest, the guest gets to ask the question of the day, and this is for our listeners to answer. So what is our question of the day? You get to ask.
I get to ask the question of the day. Oh my gosh, I have so many questions I want to ask. So many questions. Do you know why your horse is either barefoot or shod? And is he truly comfortable? And I mean truly comfortable. There's a lot of lame horses that people don't know about. Is he truly comfortable in what he's in, barefoot or shod?
Whoa, I love that one. I really love the first part of that. Do you know why? So many people have no idea.
Yep.
I think that's awesome.
They have to know why. I've always been a why person. I've never, ever done well with anybody that said just because. Do as you're. No. I want to know why. And so I have searched high and low to get my whys answered. So.
Wow. I love it. All right, gang, that's our question of the day. Give us your answers in the comments section below these audios. Kendra, I want to thank you so much for joining here. This is definitely a broadcast where I learned a ton. I'm sure everyone else did, and I had an absolute blast.
Thank you for having me. It was so much fun. I loved sharing. It was great.
Good. Perfect. All right, just hang on for a moment as I make our close here, Kendra, and we'll chat a little bit more afterwards. So, gang, I want to thank you for tuning in to episode number 12 of Talking About Horses. I really appreciate you giving Kendra and I your ear. Please remember that if you've missed any of this, you can access the full broadcast through Facebook, YouTube, or by streaming directly from iTunes once we get it uploaded on there. Through whatever outlet you're listening, please be sure to give us a rating, a comment, a review, and a share. Your word of mouth is the fuel for this fire. And tune in next week for my interview with Wendy Murdoch. We're going to talk about Surefoot and her horseback safaris in Africa. Tune in then. Thanks, gang.